Hello, this is Mathematics. And have you ever wondered why you can't divide by zero? Maybe you tried typing it into your calculator and it ended up returning undefined or some kind of error message. Either way, it doesn't give a real explanation. Well, this video is going to explain why. However, before we consider why we can't divide by zero, I think it's important to ask what would happen if we tried to divide by zero. After all, how can we say we can't divide by zero without actually trying to divide by it? Well, that brings us to our first question. When trying to divide by zero, what does it look like? Take 1 over 0, for example. Does it equal 0? Or maybe 1 over 0 equals infinity. One way we can determine the answer to this question is by seeing what happens when we start using numbers that get closer and closer to 0. Take the function f of x equals 1 over x, for example. Let's start by plugging in some numbers that we know will give us an understandable answer. For example, if I were to make a table, plugging in 1 for x gives us f of 1 equals 1. Plugging in 2 gives us f of 2 equals 1/2. Plugging in 3 gives us f of 3 equals 1/3, and so on and so forth. Essentially, the function gives smaller numbers as we plug in bigger numbers. In other words, as our input increases, our output decreases. So in this case, 2 is greater than 1. That would be our input. But our output, 1/2, is less than 1. Likewise, our input, 3, is greater than 2, but our output, 1/3, is less than 1/2. So this relationship is what we call an inverse relationship, which basically means that as something increases, another thing decreases. The same is true in reverse. For example, notice how, as our input gets smaller, our output gets bigger. So in this case, if we were to compare the input 2 to the input 3, notice how our output, 1/2, is actually bigger than 1/3, while in the input's case, 2 is less than 3. This can also be seen when comparing 1 to 2. So in this case, our input, 1, is less than 2, but when we look at our output, 1 is bigger than 1/2. So, by this logic, if we plug in numbers that are smaller, or in this case, that get closer to 0, our output should get bigger and bigger. When plugging in 0.1, we get f of 0.1 equals 10. Plugging in 0.01 gives us f of 0.01 equals 100. Plugging in 0.001 gives us f of 0.001, which equals 1,000. And if we keep doing this for a little bit, you'll notice how, as we plug in smaller and smaller numbers, we only get bigger and bigger results. So, ultimately, as our input gets smaller and closer to 0, our output gets bigger and closer to infinity. Wait, so is that it? Does 1 divided by 0 equal infinity? It would appear so, but we're only looking at half the story. That's because there's another way to get to 0. In our first example, we considered getting to 0 from the positive side. But you can also get to 0 from the negative side. After all, 0 is right in between the negative and positive numbers. So what happens when we try to approach 0 from the negative side? Well, using our previous example, we will notice something similar. A slight difference is that our input is increasing to 0. However, it's still an inverse relationship since our output is decreasing. So when taking a look at this example, we'll notice that -1 is actually bigger than -2. But when looking at the output, we'll see that -1 is smaller than -1/2. So as our input increases, our output decreases. From this, we'll notice that as we get closer and closer to 0, something interesting is going to happen. For example, when plugging in -0.1, we get -10. Plugging in -0.01 gives us -100. Plugging in -0.001 gives us -1,000. And as we plug in bigger, or in this case, bigger and bigger numbers, or numbers that get closer and closer to 0, we'll get overall smaller and smaller outputs. Ultimately, as our input gets bigger and closer to 0, our output gets smaller and closer to -infinity. Wait, but earlier, we showed how getting closer to 0 from the positive side results in getting closer to positive infinity. So which is it? Does 1 divided by 0 equal positive infinity? Or does it equal -infinity? The truth is, it equals neither. In fact, it doesn't equal anything. But this issue over negative and positive infinity explains why. One side says 1 divided by 0 should approach infinity, while the other says it should approach -infinity. Ultimately, you can't divide by 0 because both sides don't give the same answer. In this video, I chose to use the example of 1 divided by 0, but this explanation holds true for any number divided by 0. Anyways, I hope this video explains why you can't divide by 0. Please do be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and if you want me to keep making more content like this. And also, if you have any math questions, please do feel free to comment, and I will make a video on it. Anyways, thanks for watching. Bye.